own computer. Okay, and you will be aware of that and click it off. Right, I will also actually, to be sensible, mute everybody. If you want to ask a question or make a point or blow a raspberry, you can unmute yourself very quickly. And now I'm going to share my screen and go straight to our first slide. Now, I think I have to start with an apology, actually, because I thought that I could turn this into some sort of narrative history of the Cossacks. And they're such a slippery bunch that, in fact, I found I can't. So let's see what we've got. I've managed to pick up quite a few very interesting images, which we will see. The first one being where we start, with the Golden Horde. And in fact, they moved around a lot. They didn't actually occupy that area at all, but they certainly made sure that their presence was felt. You might notice that Lithuania is actually free of the Golden Horde. We'll come on to Lithuania later. And the Bronze Horde, I think, must be the Ottoman Empire, or part of the Ottoman Empire, which would include, of course, Constantinople and Turkey, what we call Turkey. I hope you've had a chance to quickly skim through the words. I put those on because many people will want to see the PowerPoint, and those are the notes. They were a pretty lawless bunch. In fact, they weren't a race, they weren't a culture, they weren't anything really to start with. They came from all over the place, mostly Poland and Lithuania and the steppes of Russia. And they occupied the Badlands, which we now call the Ukraine. And as you can see in this very famous painting, they were very different mixed lots. Some of Tatar origin, some of European origin, all sorts. But over the years, over a couple of hundred years, in fact, they eventually adopted a uniform and felt that they were one particular sort of human being called a Cossack. But there were many different Cossacks, the Don Cossacks, the Kuban Cossacks, the Zaporozhian Cossacks, and the one we saw before, just back there, were the Zaporozhian Cossacks, writing to the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire a very, very rude letter, which I have decided not to read out to you. They were more or less mercenaries. They would go wherever they were asked to. Under Ivan the Terrible, Yermak led a band, and they would be a bodyguard of sorts, really, light infantry, etc. But eventually, he rode east and defeated the Siberian Khan, and Siberia from then on was part of the Russian Empire, which had not been before. During the reign of Catherine the Great, a man called Pugachev decided that he would be the great Khan, if you like, the Cossack Khan of Russia, and he led a great insurrection. You can read what it says there. Catherine, of course, was a very canny woman, very clever, and in fact, if we go, Pugachev inevitably was captured and killed. He was assassinated. But he was popular, and serfdom was something that was very important consideration in Russia. Catherine was famous for two things. sex and administration. She was a very good administrator. And the other thing we won't talk about. And she decided that she would carve Russia up into various states and put in a civil service and somebody in charge. And she gave the Zaporozhian Cossacks a grant of land, and they were free of paying taxes. Very clever of her. Thereupon, they generally tended to favor whoever was the Tsar, although they were free themselves, and they were always on hire to whoever wanted them. And the Tsar Alexander had a Cossack bodyguard, and when he was assassinated, they were put to use. You can see a man with a top hat attempting to rescue a child. Now, I don't think he's going to succeed, actually. They use the saber, but only, I think, for flashing in the air. Mostly they use whips, the leather whip of the Cossack, with a knob on the end, you can see. I'm glad that Narodnya Volya is mentioned here, the people's will, that translates as, because one of the people who was part of Narodnya Volya and who was executed along with the others when they tried to assassinate the Tsar was a man called Alexander Ulyanov. And it made a terrible impression on his younger brother, Vladimir Ulyanov, who later on changed his name to Lenin. And I think you know who I mean. As a bodyguard to Tsars, they were very popular. Nicholas II actually dressed up as a Cossack. He thought they were quite a splendid lot. They were basically still on hire and could be the different Cossacks. There were the Don Cossacks and Kuban Cossacks. Catherine had said that the Kuban Cossacks were free of taxes, provided they kept the gates to the Ottoman Empire free, and they did that job. So they were more or less sort of gatekeepers and bodyguards, but still available to whoever wanted them. 1917 came, and the question you can read there, who are you with, us or them? Most of them said, we're with them. But the Zaporozhian Sich felt quite differently. And in fact, lots of them fled to Western Europe and said they had no wish to have anything to do with the Russian Revolution. Stalin had no time for them or for the Ukraine, where they mostly lived. And they were fiercely repressed. And not only just the armed men, but the families. Millions died of starvation during the 1930s. But it had started before that. You can see by 1921, they had less than halved. This is a very interesting map. Take no notice of the date 1933. I don't believe it for a second. Poland, of course, had not been cut up by the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. That took place much later, I think. And neither was Czechoslovakia part of the German Empire. Kiev was, and in fact, the whole of what we call Ukraine. But Czechoslovakia was not. And it's interesting that Lithuania were not included as well. They would become part of the Russian Empire. In 1940, Hollywood, for some strange reason, got all romantic about the Cossacks. I've put this picture with great pleasure in here. It's Nelson Eddy singing At the Balalaika or Ride Cossack Ride. I put it here because I can distinctly remember seeing it aged 8 or 9 at the Red Hall Cinema, Walham Green in Fulham during the London Blitz. Nelson Eddy, who'd have thought? But wait a minute, even later, we had, what's this chap's name? I can't remember now. Anyway, he's very important. He played with Yul Brynner. Yul Brynner taking the part of Taras Bulba, who was one of the Zaporozhian Cossacks. I don't know why Hollywood feels so romantic about the Cossacks. I think they're a bunch of thugs myself, but there we are. It takes all sorts, as they say. You would not be surprised to learn that some decided to make their peace with the Germans. In fact, the German army didn't like them, didn't want them. But Himmler, who's in charge of the SS, which was different, was quite happy to use them, to do some of the dirty work of the SS. And of course, they were very good at breaking things up, especially rounding up Jews and stuff like that, nasty bits and pieces. They are still very much part of the Russian army now, however, and they are a central component of Russia's army in the south. And we will come. They played, it says, a pivotal role in the annexation of the Crimea. So Russia has made its peace with the naughty boys of the Badlands and adopted them. Somebody's coming in, they're a bit late. There we are. So they're part of the Russian Empire now, but not all of them. The Russians tend to use them as members of what they call Spetsnaz, or John Abbott will tell us about that because he knows all about the army and war and things. He's very, very clued up on that. And as that, they are still maintaining their role of breaking up demonstrations. Not much has changed in 300 years. They still do it. And that particular man, in fact, is a colonel in the Cossack group. And of course, they swap their whips and their sabers for something a bit more in line with modern warfare. They are very much part of Russia's attempts to grab hold from the Crimea and create a bridge along the south of the Ukraine to reach the Crimea and eventually the port of Odessa, which will be very important to them. That's the last slide, and I hope that I can have some comments or questions. I hope comments rather than questions, because I don't have all the answers. Well, unmute yourself, Robert.
On the first slide, you talk about, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. On the first slide, you talk about the Cossacks protecting the south of Russia. Who were they protecting Russia from?
The Ottoman Empire. Oh no, that didn't exist, did it? No, it was later on they were tasked with, under Catherine II. Mm-hmm. That was the job she gave them, and they were free of tax because of that.
Right. Thank you.
Questions, comments? Yes, Mile.
some years ago, I read a book by Arthur Kessler. I hope that's a correct pronunciation, about a group of people called the Khazars. Khaz. Ah, yes. Ladies nodding, she's read it as well. Now, I know that
it's pronounced Khazars with a K. KH.
Khazar, more or less.
Yeah.
Now, there are a lot of people subsequently rubbished Kessler's book, various reasons, but he did suggest that the whole area of what we now call Ukraine had been the subject of several major population changes right up until the present time, and the Cossacks as a group were, as you said, very much or a bit like the Wild West. There were all sorts of people came together. Now, if anybody can shed more light on that, or confirm or deny that, I'd be very interested, because it does seem to me that what the Ukrainians call the Ukraine is in fact a fairly recent creation.
Not quite, but it was called the Wild East for quite a long time. It was the Badlands, and it was the bit that nobody wanted.
And yet it's an extremely fertile area.
If you were an escaped serf or a criminal or anything, you went to the Badlands because they would accept anybody.
Well, I think there's a couple of things, Tom, that I think the Ukraine was part of the Polish Empire at one stage.
Yeah.
And then I remember there was a movie called Taurus Bulba, which I saw when I was a child, which was the Cossacks throwing the Poles out of Kiev. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the one I showed you with Yul Brynner and some other chap.
Tony Curtis.
Yes, his son. Yeah. Oh, he was his son. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm Jewish, and we were brought up all to know that the Cossacks were the ones who gave us the pogroms in the 1880s and forced Jews to leave and go to America and Israel, or Palestine as it was then, and various other countries.
Yes. Yes. They were. They were prepared to do the dirty work for either the Russians or the Germans, whoever would have them.
And
Yeah,
certainly, sorry, go on.
Yeah, my mother was Polish, and she actually hated the Ukrainians because they did the dirty work for the Germans in Poland. Yeah.
Yes, that's what the Jewish descendants of Polish and Ukrainians have been told. I mean, we always were told that it was the Germans didn't have to work very hard at getting rid of the Jews and murdering them, because the Cossacks did it for them in the Second World War, or before the Second World War.
Yes, yes. And that's why Himmler was prepared to have them in the SS, where the German army said, well, light infantry, we don't think there's much for them to do in a modern war. They still had sabres and lances and things. In fact, there's a story about the Polish infantry charging tanks.
It's totally false. Totally false, Tom.
Totally false. But
Seconded.
It wasn't the Poles. It was actually the Cossacks. John might have something to say about that. I can't.
Sorry, Tom. I've had technical problems.
Right. No, I'm talking about John Abbott in Todmorden.
Sorry.
He knows quite a lot more than I do about these things, but he won't. I can't get him to talk, so fair enough.
Oh, right. No, I just I haven't really. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. Can you hear me, brother? No, I was just saying about the Ukrainian. I mean, you probably said before I come on, most of the guards at the concentration camps were of Ukrainian sort of, you know, they recruited them.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, quite a lot of them were, you know, apart from being in the SS, a natural continuation was they were, you know, pretty ruthless when it came to running the camps. Yeah. So yeah.
Well, hence my remark about them being a bad lot. It's a pity, John Rawlings, that you joined late, because in fact we just finished a slideshow about that.
Oh,
But,
yeah. I'm ever so sorry, Tom. I just one of those days where I couldn't get connected and everything's just haywire, you know.
That's okay. That's fine.
Did you get my about the what was it? The talk about the way we were.
Yes, I think so.
Oh,
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm diverting, but
Right.
I did enjoy that. I mean, I was, you know. Anyway, back to this. Yeah.
I will send that to you, I think, or something. Okay, any more comments? Any more questions? No, nothing at all.
I'd
No.
like to hear from John Abbott, please. Are you a specialist in this area? John?
You're muted, John. You're muted.
John Abbott. No, John
John
Rawlings.
No, the other John, not
Oh,
John.
the other John. Sorry.
I have to unmute him. I don't think. Oh,
No,
yes.
it's all right. I think I've done it. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes. No, I have a reputation as being a whiz on matters military, and it's very amateurish. I know a little bit about things military, but in this area, it's all completely new to me. I've learned a great deal from that, and I don't really have anything to contribute. Tom asked me about the role of light cavalry in World War II, and I couldn't contribute anything. The only thing I would want to say about the suppression of Jews in the Second World War is that very few countries had any difficulty rounding up the Jews. Most anti-Semitism was rife in England as well as everywhere else in the 30s.
Yeah.
And most countries had no problems at all in rounding up their Jews and putting them in special camps. The French particularly did all the work. It was only, I think, Denmark.
I think Holland and Norway as well.
Yeah.
Yes,
Norway
Denmark didn't, though. Denmark's queen wore a yellow star.
That's right. On
They
day one.
refused to give up their Jews.
Yes.
But in fact, my parents were very involved in helping Jews in Soviet Russia before they were allowed to leave. And so I had heard a lot about Russian history from my father, who was actually from a family who came to England in 1666. But in fact, he studied Russian as a degree late in life, and therefore spoke it and had a knack for languages. So he used to phone the dissidents in Russia, in the Soviet Union as it was, and speak to them and get the news out, which is how we heard so much about what was going on through the newspapers in England.
Yeah.
On top of that, my daughter is a rabbi and in the Reform movement, Reform Jewish movement, and she's just today come back from the March of the Living, and was in some of the camps. I don't know if everybody knows what the March of the Living is.
No.
How can you tell us?
Celebration.
Well, towards the end, right at the end of the war, when the Germans knew that they had lost, they marched a lot of the surviving inmates from Auschwitz to Birkenau. Auschwitz was a labor camp, but Birkenau had its own the crematoria. And so it was purely a murdering camp. There were no huts for people to live there. And they marched them across, I think it was a couple of miles. And today, a lot of Jewish people and Israelis go on this march and call it the opposite, the March of the Living, to show that Hitler didn't win and that the Nazis didn't win and that we are still around. Thank you.
Yes,
But
yeah.
she went with an interfaith group because we're very keen on interfaith in our family.
Mm.
That's, I find that very touching, Lana. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Well, John claims he doesn't know very much about life infantry, but he does know about the Red Horse Cinema in Walham Green because he likes to go there.
My word.
That was 70 odd years ago.
That takes me back.
Yes.
Just as a
One of the things about, I don't know if you said again, Ukraine was the location of probably the worst, extermination in Baba Yar, where they, for 2 days, they killed, I think, 32,000, which was, and again, that was all very few sort of SS there. It was mostly the locals who sort of, helped out, so yeah, they, they haven't got a good reputation at the moment. I don't think, they was.
Not at all.
I have visited Baba Yar.
Have you?
It's a soulless place. It's very but the other thing that was very well known was that in Stalin's time, he had the kulaks, who were also partly Cossack.
Yeah.
He just shipped a lot of them off to Siberia.
Mm.
And when they were trying to make the farmland into communist farms,
Yeah.
and he in socialist farms, and anyone who objected was killed or shipped off. So he caused the largest famine in the bread basket of Europe in the 1930s.
Yeah.
The Holodomor.
All right. Well, that's
Interestingly, apparently, I was reading somewhere that as a result of both earlier cruelties and that one of the largest concentrations of people of Ukrainian descent is in eastern Siberia.
Quite likely, yeah.
Those people were shipped to the Vladivostok area to keep them well away from, well, A, to populate that area, which was pretty well empty, and B, to get them well away from their original homeland.
yeah. Interesting.
Well, Stalin was very much involved in, the Katyn forest, where they killed the cream of the Polish officers. And he blamed it on the Germans, and it was only later on that it came out that it was, they did it. So it was, again, I think, in many ways, both he and, well, probably killed more people than actually Hitler did in some ways. But
yes, certainly more people died in Russia than anywhere else.
Yeah.
I'm going to close now. Thank you very much for attending.
Oh, yes.
Thank you, Tom.
Sorry I was late.
Very interesting, Tom. Thank you.
Well researched and well presented. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you very much, John. This is available as a recording.
Oh, right.
And also as a PowerPoint presentation. Just write to me.
Okay.
Thank you and goodbye, everyone.
Cheerio.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Yes.
Goodbye.